Imagine walking through a place where pain was routine, silence was enforced, and suffering was considered treatment. Before we go any further, ask yourself this: what happens when human agony is locked inside walls for decades? When despair is never acknowledged, never healed, only abandoned? Welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, this is where we explore the darkest truths hidden beneath history, psychology, and the unexplained. So before we begin, take a moment to subscribe and join us as we uncover stories that refuse to stay buried. Tonight, we are stepping into America's abandoned asylums, institutions once praised as places of healing but later exposed as factories of torment, where society sent those it did not understand, the mentally ill, the traumatized, the inconvenient, and often the forgotten. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, when mental health care was driven more by fear than compassion, and diagnoses were vague, dangerous, and often irreversible, where women could be institutionalized for grief, men for defiance, and children for being different, locked away under the belief that isolation, restraint, and experimentation would somehow restore order to the human mind. But instead, these institutions became breeding grounds for unimaginable suffering as patients were subjected to prolonged solitary confinement, forced sterilizations, lobotomies performed without anesthesia, ice baths meant to shock obedience, and electroshock treatments administered as punishment rather than therapy, creating environments saturated with terror and emotional trauma so intense that many paranormal researchers believe it imprinted itself onto the physical structure itself, a theory known as residual haunting, where repeated emotional extremes leave behind echoes that replay endlessly like a broken recording. And as we move forward into documented cases, eyewitness testimony, and chilling investigations, remember these were not haunted places first. They were human tragedies long before they became paranormal ones. Now imagine returning to these locations decades after the doors were sealed, when nature has begun reclaiming the halls and silence hangs heavy in the air. Yet countless investigators, historians, and former employees report that these places are anything but empty, beginning with Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia, a massive Gothic structure where staff and visitors have documented unexplained footsteps echoing through empty corridors, doors slamming without airflow, and voices captured on audio recordings responding intelligently to direct questions, often whispering names or pleading words, while shadow figures have been reported moving between cells where overcrowding once forced patients to sleep standing up. And then there's Pennhurst State School and Hospital in Pennsylvania, notorious for its abuse scandals, where multiple independent witnesses have described full-bodied apparitions of patients wandering hallways, children's laughter echoing through abandoned wards, and electronic voice phenomena that directly reference treatments endured there. Recordings that have been analyzed and deemed unaltered by professionals, further supported by thermal imaging anomalies showing cold spots forming human-like shapes in rooms where no environmental explanation exists. And as technology advanced, modern tools like REM pods, electromagnetic field meters, and motion sensors began reacting in ways investigators could not replicate naturally, triggering responses during controlled sessions that align disturbingly well with historical records of deaths, punishments, and medical procedures, pushing these locations beyond folklore and into the realm of documented anomaly, where science fails to fully explain why these former institutions continue to respond, react, and sometimes communicate. But data alone doesn't convey fear, and that's where personal testimony becomes impossible to ignore, as former maintenance workers describe feeling watched while alone on night shifts, sensing hands brush past them in pitch-black hallways, or hearing their names whispered from empty rooms, while urban explorers recount being overcome with sudden dread so intense they fled without explanation, later discovering they were standing in former isolation cells known for patient deaths, and professional paranormal investigators, many of whom entered these locations as skeptics, describe moments where equipment activated simultaneously, temperatures dropped abruptly, and unseen forces responded to direct questions with precise timing. One investigator recounting a moment at Waverly Hills Sanatorium where a childlike voice answered a question no one had spoken aloud, while another recalls being pushed backward by an invisible force during a respectful walkthrough, experiences that left psychological scars long after the investigations ended, as many report recurring dreams, heightened anxiety, and a lingering sense of presence following them home, forcing even seasoned researchers to confront the possibility that whatever remains inside these asylums is not merely energy, but awareness, something capable of interaction, observation, and perhaps memory. To understand why these hauntings feel so different, so heavy, we must return to the abuses that occurred behind locked doors, where lobotomies stripped individuals of personality and identity, electroshock treatments induced terror rather than healing, and prolonged isolation fractured already fragile minds. Emotional extremes that paranormal theorists believe created concentrated imprints of anguish so powerful they bound fragments of consciousness to these locations, manifesting today as repetitive sounds, visible apparitions, and interactive entities that mirror the trauma endured there. And unlike malevolent hauntings driven by aggression, many asylum spirits are described as confused, distressed, or simply present, reenacting routines from lives they never chose, leading researchers to propose the trapped echo theory, suggesting these entities are neither demons nor monsters, but remnants of human suffering left unresolved, unable to move on due to the sheer scale of injustice inflicted upon them, making these hauntings less about fear and more about unresolved history. Silent warnings etched into decaying walls that remind us what happens when humanity is replaced with control, neglect, and cruelty. Today, many of these asylums stand abandoned, demolished, or repurposed as tourist attractions, raising uncomfortable ethical questions about whether these sites should be preserved as warnings, memorials, or left to fade into obscurity, while paranormal tourism continues to grow, drawing thrill-seekers into places of profound suffering, sometimes without understanding the trauma embedded within. And as cities debate redevelopment, some investigators warn that disturbing these locations may intensify activity rather than erase it, suggesting that acknowledgement, respect, and remembrance may be the only way to truly quiet the echoes, because whether you believe in ghosts or not, the documented history, consistent testimonies, and unexplained phenomena force us to confront a chilling possibility that the greatest horror of America's abandoned asylums is not just what happened there, but what still remains, watching, remembering, and waiting. And as you leave this story behind, consider this final question: if suffering leaves an imprint on the soul, and the soul leaves an imprint on the world, are these places haunted by spirits or by history itself? What if the most dangerous things in a museum aren't locked behind glass for protection, but for containment? What if history isn't silent, but waiting? Before we begin, ask yourself this: have you ever stood in a museum and felt uneasy for no reason, as if something was watching you back from the display? Welcome to the channel, where we investigate the unexplained, the forgotten, and the stories history doesn't like to talk about. And if you're fascinated by true mysteries rooted in documented events, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Tonight, we're uncovering a lesser-known truth about American museums: that some artifacts aren't just preserved objects, but carriers of violent pasts, trauma, belief systems, and in some cases, a chain of misfortune that follows them wherever they go. A phenomenon curators quietly acknowledge but rarely discuss publicly. Known among historians and archivists as problem artifacts, objects repeatedly linked to unexplained illness, accidents, or persistent disturbances after entering collections, items that differ from ordinary relics because their effects don't remain in the past. They continue, documented not in legend alone, but in incident reports, restricted memos, and first-hand accounts from museum staff. And as we move forward, we'll explore specific American collections, tracing cursed objects from ancient effigies to modern memorabilia, revealing how some exhibits whisper more than history they radiate it. Our journey begins with some of the oldest objects housed in American museums, artifacts acquired during early expeditions, colonial collecting eras, and archaeological removals, often without cultural consent, including ritual effigies, ceremonial tools, and funerary objects never meant to be displayed, such as the infamous spirit doll, housed for decades in a southwestern museum archive, an object believed by its originating culture to serve as a containment vessel for unresolved spirits, after whose arrival multiple staff members reported recurring nightmares, sudden illness, and unexplainable equipment failures localized to its storage wing. incidents documented internally but never released publicly, or the so-called mummy's hand held in a New England collection, removed from its original burial context in the 19th century, after which donors, handlers, and even visitor experienced a pattern of misfortune ranging from sudden accidents to financial collapse, echoing warnings found in historical acquisition notes advising against disturbing the remains, raising ethical questions museums still grapple with today. Whether removing such items not only disrespects their cultural origin, but also disrupts spiritual systems designed to keep dangerous forces contained, and whether returning or reinterring them might end the disturbances, a debate that continues quietly behind closed doors. As museums expanded in the Victorian and early industrial eras, collections began absorbing deeply personal objects tied to tragedy, grief, and obsession, items donated by families seeking preservation rather than peace, such as the dying bride's veil displayed briefly at a Midwestern historical society, worn by a woman who passed away hours after her wedding, after which curators documented cold drafts localized to its case, unexplained fabric movement, and repeated electrical failures during exhibit hours, or the gambler's watch, donated to a museum after being recovered from a river alongside its owner's body, an object reportedly stopping at the exact time of death and later restarting inexplicably in storage, coinciding with a string of misfortunes affecting staff assigned to catalog it, reinforcing Victorian-era beliefs that intense emotional attachment could imprint objects permanently, turning them into vessels for unresolved intent, guilt, or despair, a cultural fear that may have been more perceptive than primitive, especially when modern cases continue echoing the same unsettling patterns. What makes these stories more disturbing is that curses aren't limited to ancient or antique objects. Modern museums report similar disturbances tied to contemporary items, including a haunted typewriter, displayed in a literary museum, once owned by an author known for disturbing subject matter, which repeatedly typed characters without power connected, malfunctioned beyond mechanical explanation, and coincided with anxiety attacks among staff working late hours nearby, or a cursed sports trophy housed in a Hall of Fame collection, associated with a string of career-ending injuries and scandals following its exhibition, prompting quiet relocation to off-display storage. These modern cases challenging the belief that curses belong to folklore, suggesting instead that emotional trauma, obsession, or collective belief may imprint objects regardless of age, forcing museums to confront an uncomfortable reality that curation is not just preservation, but risk management. Behind public exhibits, museums maintain vast archives where countless objects are never displayed, and among them are items flagged internally for restricted handling, stored separately, monitored more closely, and sometimes subjected to quiet rituals, cultural consultations, or long-term isolation after repeated incidents, practices rarely acknowledged publicly to avoid panic or reputational damage, but spoken about in private among archivists, leading to the unsettling conclusion that many more cursed objects may exist beyond public view, waiting in climate-controlled darkness, untouched, not out of neglect, but caution. And as we conclude, consider this final question: if objects can carry history, emotion, and intent, what responsibility do we bear when we remove them from their origins? And how many stories, warnings, and dangers remain sealed in museum basements across America, unseen, unspoken, and very much awake? Picture a homestead standing alone beneath an endless sky, miles from the nearest road, where the land promises freedom, self-reliance, and peace. But before we go any further, ask yourself this: what happens when that isolation becomes absolute, when help is too far away to matter? Welcome back to the channel, where we uncover true stories buried beneath history, geography, and fear. And if you're new here and drawn to real accounts of unexplained phenomena and human survival, make sure to subscribe and stay with us as we explore the unknown. For generations, rural American families chased the dream of independence, settling deep in forests, plains, and mountain valleys, believing the land itself would protect them. But isolation is a double-edged sword, because while distance kept society away, it also removed witnesses, protection, and certainty, amplifying every sound, shadow, and unexplained moment, creating an environment where fear could grow unchecked. where the howl of the wind through broken boards sounded like footsteps, where darkness wasn't just the absence of light but a presence of its own, and where families quickly learned that when something went wrong out there, no one was coming to help. As nights stretched long and silent, many homesteaders began reporting disturbances they couldn't explain: footsteps pacing empty porches, doors creaking open despite being barred, whispers drifting through rooms that were supposed to be emptied, and the overwhelming sensation of being watched from just beyond the firelight. Accounts recorded in journals, letters, and oral histories where families described hearing boots crunching gravel outside, only to find no tracks by morning, or sensing movement inside barns long after animals were secured, with some incidents escalating beyond sound as objects shifted places, tools vanished and reappeared, and bedding was found disturbed, as if someone had stood beside the bed during the night, leaving families questioning whether they were facing human trespassers, wild animals with unnatural intelligence, or something else entirely, something unseen that learned routines, tested boundaries, and returned night after night, slowly eroding any sense of safety. For many isolated families, the terror crossed a threshold when livestock began turning up dead. Animals found mutilated in ways that didn't align with known predators. No tracks, no struggle, no clear cause, just silence and precision. Cattle drained of blood without torn flesh, chickens killed without being eaten, horses refusing to enter barns where they had stood calmly for years, and fences damaged in ways that suggested deliberate manipulation rather than brute force, with strange markings carved into wood or soil, symbols no one recognized, patterns too consistent to be coincidence, leading some families to arm themselves and take turns keeping watch through the night, only to report seeing nothing while still hearing movement, reinforcing the unsettling idea that whatever was stalking them understood how to remain unseen, turning the land itself into a threat. As weeks turned into months, the psychological toll became as destructive as any physical damage, with families growing paranoid, sleep-deprived, and suspicious of anyone who ventured near their land, while isolated communities quietly shared stories of similar events happening miles apart, to spread out to explain icily, yet eerily consistent, resulting in breakdowns of trust, families abandoning homesteads they had worked for generations to build, and others staying but living in constant fear, rifles by the door, lights burning through the night, children forbidden from wandering, and elders whispering warnings passed down from earlier settlers who claimed the land had always watched. Those who tried to tame it, transforming isolation from a lifestyle into a prison of constant vigilance and dread. Today, many of these homesteads sit abandoned, reclaimed by wilderness, while the stories remain alive through descendants who still recount nights filled with fear and unanswered questions. Historians and researchers proposing explanations ranging from rare predator behavior to psychological stress, environmental sounds, or human interference, yet none fully account for the patterns, intelligence, and persistence described across generations and regions, leaving us with unsettling possibilities that the deep wilderness still holds forces we don't fully understand. And as we close, consider this: when civilization fades and isolation takes over, are we truly alone or merely exposed? And if your family has ever lived far from roads, neighbors, or light, what stories were whispered when the wind rose at night, waiting to be remembered?